Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to give you a glimpse of the Highgate Cemetery. I went there last week and I really enjoyed it because it's a beautiful place. This video will be probably divided in two parts. In the first one I will give you some information about the cemetery and its history. In the second part I will just show you some images so you can have an idea of how beautiful it looks. The cemetery was built in 1839 after 3 years of works, and that was the west wing. The east wing was built in 1854. Between these two cemeteries there are 170k persons buried. Some of them are celebrities. I will tell you which ones in a little while. In the Victorian era, this cemetery was used by people to take a walk, like taking a stroll in the park, taking a stroll in the cemetery. Basically it was the same thing at the time. The construction of this cemetery was inspired by Père Lachaise, that is one of the most famous cemetery in Paris. At the entrance there is a colonnade where you go through, and that's basically the entrance from the west wing of the cemetery. When you go up through the stairs you will enter in the proper cemetery. Going along you will eventually arrive to the Egyptian Avenue, that is the most characteristic part of the cemetery, and especially in the Lebanon Circle there are some celebrities that are buried there, one of which is Radcliffe Hall. She became popular because she shocked society by coming out as a lesbian during a time where it was forbidden, homosexuality was not seen in a positive way, and she was leaving her relationship with her partner in plain sight. So this shocked society, and she also wrote a book called The Well of Loneliness that was very controversial for the time. Radcliffe Hall is just one of the many celebrities that are buried in this cemetery. There are a lot of them, some of which are George Michael from Wham, the actor Bob Hoskins, a lot of writers like George Eliot, Douglas Adams that wrote the Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy, Gray, the author of Grey's Anatomy, not this one, but this one. There is also a part of Charles Dickens' family, even if Charles Dickens is not buried there but in Westminster Abbey. There is Karl Marx. He actually has two tombs in the Highgate Cemetery. One is the proper tomb that is like in a really small path that you have to go to see that, and then there is another one that is huge with a big head sculpted on top of it, and it's one of the main attractions of this cemetery. There are a lot of other famous people like Malcolm McLaren, an impresario and one of the founders of Sex Pistols, Michael Faraday, that was a chemist that led some studies into the electromagnetism, Storm Thorgerson, that was a graphic designer that designed the album covers of many bands like the Cranberries, Genesis, and especially Pink Floyd. The screenwriters Anthony Schaffer that wrote The Wicker Man, and Peter Schaffer that wrote Amadeus from 1984. Carl Meyer that was the screenwriter of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Tom Smith that was the inventor of the Christmas crackers. Who knew that? I just discovered when I went there. Henry Newton that was the co-founder of Winsor and Newton, the art supplies. William Foyle that was the founder of the Foyle bookstore. Danny Wilder that was the singer of Kings of the City, a band that is not very popular but is really good, you should listen to it. And Danny Wilder can be considered one of the Club 27 because unfortunately he passed away when he was 27 years old. He was the lead singer of the band and unfortunately he died of lung cancer. I recommend you to listen to their music because it's really good. But the reason why this cemetery became so popular is for a case that happened in at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, regarding the Highgate vampire. Basically, at the end of the 60s, the cemetery was in bad shape, and eventually some intruders started going in this cemetery to make some rituals and occult stuff. After this, people started seeing a dark figure walking around the cemetery. They describe it as a tall man with a hat and a cloak. Many people apparently witnessed this figure, this weird specter. Someone started believing that this was a vampire. And that's how it all started. So at the beginning of the 70s, two persons, David Farrant and Sean Manchester, started believing that there was a vampire there, and they called themselves vampire hunters. Modern Van Helsing, if you can call them that. They went into this cemetery because they wanted to find this vampire and kill it for good. But what happened is that they were interviewed by the television, and there was this media sensationalism all around UK, and people came into this cemetery because they wanted to be vampire hunter themselves. But what happened basically is that they started destroying the cemetery and vandalizing it even more. They opened most of the tombs and destroyed the bodies, impaled them and beheaded them. So they made a lot of damage into the cemetery. What probably inspired the myth of the vampire in Highgate Cemetery is the fact that Bram Stoker himself was inspired by this cemetery to write his most famous novel, Dracula. And I'll tell you why. Basically, at the time when Bram Stoker was alive, one of the people that was buried there, Elizabeth Siddal, that was one of the lovers and models of the painter and poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti, was buried there with the only existing copy of the handwritten poems by Rossetti. After some years, when he started having some financial difficulties, he decided to exhume the body of his past lover to retrieve this copy. But what happened is that when they opened the grave, they found the model Elizabeth Siddal still intact several years after her death. This was stated in the newspapers, and that's how Bram Stoker took the inspiration to write Dracula. Probably the character of Lucy was inspired by Elizabeth Siddal. So this is how probably the myth started. Because of its atmospheric appeal and the beautiful construction of this cemetery, many movies were set there, like some movies by the Hammer Studios, like Taste the Blood of Dracula from 1970 with Christopher Lee, Tales from the Crypt from 1972, and From Beyond the Grave from 1974. But also like Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald. It inspired also the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, and it was also featured in books by Fred Vargas and Tracy Chevalier. And the Highgate Vampire is also a villain in the Dark Horse comics Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Is described as a demon that almost killed Giles and became one of Drusilla's minions. So as you can see, this cemetery and the Highgate Vampire have become really popular in pop culture as well. It probably will inspire more and more stories. So this is the first part of this video, where I wanted just to give you some information about this cemetery that I visited and loved. The second part will be released separately, and I will show you just the cemetery so I don't have to voice over that video. I will probably put some glimpse of the cemetery in this video so you can have an idea of how it looks. But if you want to see more, look also the part 2 of this video, and you will have a full spectrum of the cemetery. You will see in detail how it is. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you to the next one. Bye!